This episode is brought to you in collaboration with Inspo, the social network for industry insights, knowledge sharing, and thought leadership. At the end of the last season, I issued a call for Caribbean women founders, industry leaders, and experts to be my guests on the podcast this season. Why? To discuss how Caribbean women can maximize our economic impact while maintaining our health and well being. My guest today, a chartered accountant, a budget guru, global nomad, and author, tapped up the opportunity, and I'm so glad she did. She is Tanja Gittens. Do you aspire to an uncomplicated and fulfilling way of life? I'm Diane Squires, aka Deanne. That's what all my friends call me. I'm an island woman living on the island of Barbados and walking my path to a big and simple life. Walk with me and learn with me. Welcome to the Island Woman Podcast. Tanja, welcome to the Island Woman Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am really, really looking forward to the conversation. And first, though, I want to tell people a little bit more about you. So, Tanja has lived as a global nomad for the last 2 decades. Her passion for adventure has led to a life that really transcends the traditional life of an accountant and the culture in which she was raised. And since retiring from the corporate world, she's now focused on helping others find financial wellness while inspiring them to live out loud. It's Tanja's opinion that to truly live the life you desire, you must achieve financial stability. Here, here. This led her to write her first book, Living Loud on a Budget Authentic Financial Living. It's written in a memoir style and it's a celebration of authentic living, but disguised as a financial management book. It's written for people of the Caribbean and the diaspora. I applaud that, as many finance books do not capture who we are and where we came from. So, Tanja, happy to have you again. And I'm so ready to get into this conversation. And we usually start with a little bit of an icebreaker. So let me ask you this question. If you had to create a Caribbean survival kit for a woman entrepreneur, and you could only put three things inside, what would you pack and what would be the three things in order of priority?
So, the first one, which isn't something that you can necessarily pack as a visible something, would be guts and gumption. Yes.
Okay.
Half your half of your task is done with that one. The
Uh-huh.
second one would be good insurance.
Huh?
I'm speaking more of medical insurance. And the
Right.
third one would be a good financial system. It doesn't mean you have to have an accountant, but you have to have a good financial system and a basic understanding of finance yourself.
Well, I'm interested to know your background as a chartered accountant. How come you chose the guts and gumption as the number one priority and not, either of the other two? So why does that one have special significance to you?
Because over the years, I've recognized that it doesn't matter how much qualifications you have, how good you are at money, how good you are at your job, what schools, any of that, if you do not have guts and gumption. And as someone who's
Wow.
traveled the world, someone who's had the experience of working overseas, I recognize that the only difference between myself and a lot of persons was what I consider to be guts and gumption. And that is now what the younger brigade, like the TikTok generation, they're calling audacity.
Audacity for
Yes.
sure. Yes.
But from what I'm Gen X, and that was what we call guts and gumption.
Yeah,
And
got
I
that right.
recognize that that will get you through doors. It will get you very far. And unless you have that within you, it doesn't matter what else you have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just talked about how you have traveled the world as a chartered accountant. I know when we talk or when we hear in the Caribbean chartered accountant, we're immediately thinking, a buttoned up professional
Yes.
working in an accounting firm, or they're heading up the finance division of a major company, or even, they're running their own accounting firm. But I mean, to the point of guts and gumption, you dared to break that mold. Why? Why did you choose to do that?
The thing is, it was not necessarily something that I set out to do, but I'm one of these persons that I'm willing to follow a path. So I knew from a very early age when I left university, how you used to have this objection on your CV. Mine said to be the chief financial person of a major organization and a business owner. And I knew that that was a path that I had wanted. So I followed that road, but I also knew that travel was always going to be part of who I was or who I wanted to be. And I knew I wanted to live and work overseas. So in chasing that living and working overseas, I was able to accomplish that in my late 20s. I moved to Guernsey Channel Islands at the time. I always say to people, I barely knew how to find Guernsey on a map. I didn't know about Guernsey. I literally had to Google it and I was like, okay, well, I guess, yeah, I can go. And after one conversation, a company hired me. So I went off to live in Guernsey. And what I
Yeah.
saw was, yes, chartered accountants, but not necessarily in the traditional way of what we deem chartered accountants or qualified people or professional people in the Caribbean context to live by. It wasn't like the same level of rules. It wasn't the same restrictions. I saw a different way of life. There wasn't anything called weekend work. Like you didn't spend your weekend working. You didn't spend your weekend cleaning and cooking to make back for work. You spent your weekend enjoying yourself. On Monday morning, your coworkers would say, "Hey, what did you do this weekend? Like what fun activity did you get up to?" And
Yeah.
yes, they may have carried the children to a sporting activity or whatever, but they didn't spend their weekend cleaning and cooking and preparing for work. And, you're in such a profession where you're so restrictive, if you know the British culture, they spend a lot of time talking about holidays. When is your next holiday?
Guernsey, though, is one of those places known I'm thinking
As the offshore
for, like, kind
destination.
an offshore destination
Yes.
and kind of a lot of expats and high net worth individuals. Is that right?
High net worth. At the time when I moved to Guernsey, there was not a high level of expats. There was like a joke where I would say to my cousin, "Hey, I saw a black person today." And that would be the highlight of the week because sometimes I wouldn't see a black person the whole week. So there were expats now beginning to come in, but it wasn't that like high level of expats. It's a very tiny island, but definitely very known for offshore insurance and stuff like that. Because at that time, I was an insurance accountant. So it was from like that I started to see a different way of life. And I was like, okay, there are other paths to how you can do this. I can be all of these things. So when I came back to Barbados, I kind of came back with that type of mentality. And I also came back because I was at the point where I was very focused on becoming a financial controller. I still wanted that. And within a few months of being back here, I got that role and that was the ultimate role. But as I sat in that role, I realized like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I spent my day out in fires and stressed out of my mind. And then, I wasn't quite 30 or maybe 30. And I had like these older accountants, mostly male, who saying to me, like, "Oh, you've gotten this so young." And even before I had left Barbados, actually, I had just gotten a job the month before I was offered the role overseas to head up a small startup offshore company in Barbados. And I had a male accountant who was probably twice my age who said to me, "You can sit there till retirement." Like that's so good. And I was like, what?
I mean, though, before 30 is definitely young. I mean,
Yeah.
still by today's standards for a financial controller or someone who's going to be heading up a firm. But I mean, obviously that speaks to the level of expertise and the trust that
Yes.
people placed in you. But what I want to know is then, so you come back here and you're offered the financial controller position, you take that up and you decide, oh my gosh, this isn't exactly what I thought it would be. And you take us to how you decide and maybe give us a few examples of, taking up the unconventional route and how you manage to make a viable living doing that as a global nomad.
So immediately after that, because the year was mostly on a contractual basis, they would say, "Okay, could you hold it for a couple of," and then at the end they said, "Okay, we just want you to take this full time." And I said to them, "No, thank you. I'm good. Thanks for the opportunity, but I'm good." So I at the time I wasn't 100% certain what I wanted to do. But the question I asked myself is, if you were to die tomorrow, or if you knew you were going to die, what would be one regret that you would have? And it wasn't that fancy office, it wasn't any job opportunity, it was to travel the world. So in an upside down spin of events, I went traveling at the
So
height of my
did you take a
career.
year off or
Yes,
something to
I
travel?
felt about a
Okay.
year and a half. But I ended up to be a year and a half. It was supposed to be a year, but I ended up to being a year and a half between the time I planned planning, between the time I spent planning, actually traveling, getting back, and I went on a round the world trip. So I was on the road living for like 8 months or so, out of the suitcase, just moving from country to country, different continents, just living my best little life. And sometimes I'd meet people and I'll say to them, like, they'll say, "Oh, so what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm an accountant." And they look at me and they'll be like, "What?" And,
Why why isn't she in the office?
yeah, because like this is something that traditionally people do in a gap year, which in some cultures they do at the time that they finish university before they've started meaningful work. But more and more now, people are doing those years, as an adult. But this was 15 years ago, so it still wasn't to the point where it was very popular at that point in time, or especially popular for persons like myself from the Caribbean, or even for Black persons, you know? And I went traveling, and that's what I did. And there were people, I remember right when I had said to the director of this large conglomerate that I was not interested, original conglomerate, that I was not interested in taking on the role full time. He said to me, "You're ruining your career." Those were his words to me. And I was like, "Well, okay, if I am, okay." And I went off traveling. I came back, landed back into another position, someone who I'd worked with outside of that same brand, because at that point then I'd gone back to hospitality, which is something I did as a student. And they reached out to me, and between there, I started then traveling between Barbados and St. Lucia, to the point where I was living 1 week in one country. So I'd be here for a week, I'd go back down for a week. Sometimes I spend a month there, I spend a month here, which again was not a traditional accounting type role, but they
Yes.
obviously knew that I was someone who was very well traveled. I didn't have anything that would tie me down to the point where I couldn't go, and
Yes.
I had wealth of different levels of experience at that point in time. So they were like, "Okay, can you do this? Can you do that?" And I'll be like, "Okay, sure. I need you to do this. I need you to do that." "Okay, yeah, sure." And at the time, I was working more on a freelance basis for myself, which again is not something that persons would think that as an accountant, no, in your very early 30s, you want to do that, because that's when the time that people want to secure themselves with a particular company. They want the
Yeah.
benefits. They want that. So again, that was another way that I broke away from the tradition. And I know even in my early 20s, I had a friend who said to me, "Your job hopping a lot, is not going to work out good for you. People don't see that as something good." And I said to them, "I am interested in getting as much experience I can get from wherever I can get it. If I'm sitting in a company and there's no upward mobility, there's nothing else for me to learn, I'm going to go." So and then it got to the point where I I've had some random experiences. I lived on a construction site where they were building a 400-room hotel. It was not what I signed up for.
And where was this?
This was actually in St. Lucia, but this was like
Okay.
now 8, 9 years after the first experience in St. Lucia. So my life has been like one big upside down, travel here, travel there, which is not necessarily what traditional accountants would do, especially as you
Yeah.
get into a certain age.
But it also sounds like because you were flexible, you allowed businesses to be flexible in the way that they worked with you from one of the examples
Yes.
that you shared. And
Yes.
so you then would have been somebody who would have been distinctive from other accountants who they may have chosen to work with. So you were special.
Yes. And, there was a lady who once said to me, "You're the cleanup crew." Pretty much when companies get to that point where they just bring you into to clean up. And, and I've made a career of taking jobs that people didn't want. And
Mm,
people didn't want to leave the cushion of where they were. People didn't want to branch out to something that may not have looked as secure. People did not want to live out of a suitcase. And, and there are jobs that I was able to get pretty much because I made a career of taking those roles that people didn't want. But I was able to make a career from it. I was able to do a livelihood from it. And I was also able to really become a global nomad. And
yeah.
it's to the point where I've lived in 3 countries this year alone.
Okay. Well, I mean, this now then takes me to not just your expertise as an accountant, but now your growing business. So if I can make that shift to the business that you're now building. So you've not only authored the book Living Loud on a Budget, which is something I spoke about in your bio earlier, but you're also building the brand
Yes.
Living
Mhm.
Loud on a Budget. So to me, this is now a growing business venture. So explain to our audience what living load on a budget does as a business, and then how it can help Caribbean women make their economic impact while staying well.
So what I've done now, I've merged all the pieces of me. And that
Okay.
is the live out loud, not necessarily travel, because travel isn't everybody's version of living out loud. But one of the things that I recognize over the years is that you can be financially stable, but still be stuck in life because you're so afraid to leave where you are that you don't want to give up that nice paycheck. You do not want to give up your insurance. You don't want to give up those things. So you're not actually living. And once I had published the book, I had persons who reached out and said to me, like, I read the book not necessarily for the financial aspect, but I enjoy the travel stories. And I'm at the point now where I may not be as young as I used to be. I'm in my 50s, but I realize like I've lost my zest for life. I want to get back to that person who was living. I've had persons who have reached out and they've said, the financial aspects have really helped me because I want to live a different life, but I don't know like financially how I was able to do it. There are also individuals who reached out and they said like, I am so fearful of stepping off from where I was that I recognize that I've just boxed in myself. And one of the things that, that I spoke about in the book was traditional behaviors. And I think I recognized even before I had published the book that sometimes our issue isn't necessarily financial literacy, but it is that fear that sits within us, whether or not it was fear that was passed down to us from different generations or whatever. So, what I wanted to do was to come out not only to speak about it from a financial perspective, but I wanted to break down to help people to make that connection with why you're stuck, why you're not living the life that you want to live, how to get people to understand what life they want to live because some people just don't know what it is that they want to do. They know, okay, I have
Yeah.
a job, I want to do this. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, but who am I? I don't know who I am. I also had a mentorship program that was a goal setting program. So what I've done, I've merged everything now into a financial wellness. As someone who has also experienced burnt out, because I did go back into the corporate world at different levels in my career, and I
Yeah.
got to the point where I was burnt out in 2019. I resigned from the role that I was doing. I came to Barbados and I sat down for about 4 or 5 months. I was completely burnt. I mentally, physically, I was done. And what I've always known is that that is not a way of life. So if it is that I need to vacate a role, I'm going to do that. I'm always going to choose my health. So in creating this brand, what I wanted to do now, especially for women as we start to get up in age with menopause and perimenopause, we cannot live the same life that we were living. We cannot consume that stress, and we can't think that we're going to be able to continue to do that while aging and be healthy. So
Yeah.
I wanted to merge everything in one. So we have the financial wellness, which is not
Yes.
necessarily how you would hear about wellness, but that is that is what I want to promote. So we're looking at the financial aspect of it because we're not going to be broke.
Right.
We need that financial aspect to be able to have our stability, to be able to be independent, to be able to retire early, to just be able to live the life that we want. Then we're looking at the health aspect of it, not only physical health, but the mental health of it. And something that I'm also very big on is about healing. Because as I work with people in the financial realm of things, you don't just go out and buy 15 pairs of shoes because you don't have any self control. You do it
Yeah.
because of trauma. You do it because of a past scenario. And until you understand the reason and the rationale why you overspend, why your financial aspect is what it is, and you look after dealing with the healing of that aspect, you're never going to be financially stable. So, as the wellness part of it, that is also another area that I'm very big on in terms of people understanding the emotions behind their spending, what they're doing, and where it comes from. And the Caribbean aspect of this is not the same as the North American aspect of it. We have to look at
How so?
religion. We have to look at
Ah,
religion. We have to look at our upbringing. We have to look at what was passed on to our grandparents through the slave era. And all of those are things that have covered in the book. And then the last aspect of it with the brand is living out loud. Exactly what it is that you want to do outside of the 9 to 4. It's not about riches and wealth and whatever. It is about living life on your own terms, being that person, giving yourself permission to live.
Feeling lost in the noise of social media? Inspo cuts through the clutter, connecting you directly with real insights from real experts and industry leaders. It's a new social network dedicated to knowledge sharing, industry insights, and thought leadership. Get the latest from top minds in your field, or build your own thought leadership portfolio on Inspo. Already trusted by thousands of professionals worldwide, be part of the conversation and download Inspo Experts today on the App Store or visit www.inspo.expert.
you are definitely not only unconventional, I would say you're quite ambitious. And on this platform, I talk a lot about having a big and simple life, which may seem like a contradiction, but I think you would agree with
Mhm.
me.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's about having your big ambition, but also pairing that well with your overall well being and having those things working together. So I want to ask you about those two things very specifically. And I'm going to ask you to put your level of ambition for the business on a scale. So, if we think about your drive to make living loud on a budget, the business that you're now building, scaling that business to a multi-million dollar globally impactful enterprise, and we put it on a scale of zero, not a priority at all, to 10, an absolute life mission, where do you think you would fall in terms of your commitment to that goal?
I think I would fall maybe at a 7 or 8.
Why?
When I was setting up the corporate side of the business, one of the things that you have to do is you have to create projections for the banking institutions. And as I start to put the projections together, one of the things that I recognize is that there is a large capacity to grow this business to be a really big brand just because of the different aspects of it. I'm doing speaking engagements, I have clients I'm working with, I have digital products, I have the book, I have models that are there right now. One is to come out. There is capacity there. I also recognize that some of it will be hindered from the Caribbean aspect, which is a whole different conversations, just simply because we do not have the good financial structure as it relates. And there's all the issues with the corresponding banks, and just something as simple as PayPal is not accessible to us. So there's that as well. But one of the things that I did recognize is that there's a large capacity to grow this business to a very big, multinational, not multinational, but millionaire type company. But I
Yes.
also recognize that in this season of my life, I do not have the aspirations to burn my life to the ground. In this season of my life, it is also very important to me to live out loud. It is also very important to me to keep my health intact. And I'm not just saying that from the perspective of everyone trying to keep their health intact. I'm saying that from the perspective as someone who lives with chronic illness that I need to keep intact.
Ah,
So for
okay.
me, while I'm building this brand, I'm not missing any sleep. I'm not. I am not missing my days of meditation. I meditate daily. Last year, I wasn't very good in exercise. I am back consistent this year. I am not missing my exercise. My daily routine involves my exercise. It involves my meditation. It involves me winding down. And I'm one who I was a hobbyist, or I am a hobbyist, and I pick up hobbies. So I've been a gardener. I just pick up different things at different points in time in my life, and I
Yeah.
like to go back to them. So early last year, or the end of the year before, I started puzzling. I was like, oh, I
Yeah,
used to
right.
fix puzzles as a child. So I went back to puzzles. I'm not puzzling a lot this year. I am not gardening a lot this year because I'm living between two countries. But I found one of my old video games. I've been playing it like mad every night. So I am not prepared to burn my life to the ground to build a brand.
that takes us really nicely on to the next question then,
Mhm.
which is about wellness. And I think you kind of laid that out well for us, but I would love for you to put that on the scale as well and weigh it out. So if we're thinking of your current sense of personal well-being, like your freedom, your time for life outside of work, and you put that now on the scale of 0, which is, you know, constantly stressed, to 10, perfectly balanced, what you are now currently, what would you say is your number right now?
Normally, on a day-to-day basis, I would say my number is well balanced.
So a
I
10?
Yeah, yeah.
10. Wow, okay.
That's where I have been for the last 2 to 3 months. But let me also
Wow.
say that I did start at the beginning of the year with a full-time job. I did go
Mm,
back to 95s at the beginning of this year, and which is the reason why I've lived in 3 countries this year. The first one, it was obvious this wasn't gonna work. The second one, I had to accept that this version of me, this was not what this was because I wasn't able to find that balance. The stress levels were not what I am willing to take on at this point in time in my life. And
yeah.
it got to the point where I had to really make a very hard decision. And I made this
Mm,
very hard decision while being offered the biggest role of my life, and I turned it down. I turned it down, and pretty much 2 weeks later, I announced that I had officially retired from the corporate world and I was going to focus on exclusively just building my brand. And so that's why I can say for the last 2 months or so, I've been balanced. I've been fully balanced. I'm at the point now where I'm trying to do a major push and a major launch. So it's not as balanced as I was last month, but I would still say that I'm reaching to like a 7. Like yesterday, I had
yeah.
a very busy day. I spent most of the day trying to get the website, SEO, and different things because I'm doing all of that myself. And at the same time, I still went to walk with a friend for over an hour yesterday afternoon
Okay.
because that was a priority.
So then between your kind of ambition and your personal well-being as a founder who is really now about to launch something major, you're 7, 8 on ambition and
Yes,
hopefully 10 on well-being, which I think is something that a lot of people would aspire.
I I don't think that when things start to settle, I'll be at a 10. But for me, it's still a 7 or 8. I
Yeah,
don't think that
got
I'm
you.
willing to accept anything less than that.
Got you. I love it. So living loud on a budget is something that we need to be looking out for very soon for a major launch. I want to ask you for any of those women who are probably in the same phase or thinking of starting something new or wondering what else is out there. What kind of advice would you give them?
And let me also say that while I'm at this funding stage, this is about my third business.
Ah,
Yes. So between for my
you're not
career,
new at this.
no, and in my career for the last, I'd say maybe 18 years or so, I have gone back and forth between 9 to 5 jobs and having my own business.
Yeah,
I used to have my own accounting consultancy as well, but I knew that that was not what I necessarily wanted to go into. So
yeah.
this is not my first rodeo. And I've also been building this particular brand. I was also building this alongside a 9 to 5. When I wrote Living Low on a Budget, I had a nine
Yeah,
to five job. I wrote that during COVID and I had a 9 to 5 job while I was writing that. So this is not, but this is the first time now that I'm saying the 9 to 5 era is done. I'm not going back. This is the only
wow.
way forward. And some of the things that I would say to persons, look after your health. Without your health, we are nothing. And when I say look after your health, I don't necessarily only mean in aspects of your building your business or in aspects of your work. I also mean in aspects of your family life. There
Yeah,
are individuals out there who, the society tells them you're a wife, you're a mother, whatever, you are expected to burn your life to the ground. No, you're not. And nobody gains from you burning your life to the ground because your family is not where it's supposed to be if you are limping, you're stressed out, you are not healthy. So look after yourself. That's definitely
yeah,
one
for
of the
sure.
things. Yes, that's definitely one of the things. The second one, if it as a financial person, an emergency fund is something that will help you through. And I know it's something that not all persons have access to. But what I would say, especially if you're going to pivot from a 9 to 5 career or from anything else, and you are saying, I want to be a founder, I want to be a business owner, I want to choose a different path, because maybe you don't even know which path you want to go. You just know that you want to get over here where you are
Yes.
now. Create
Yes.
an emergency fund, create a buffer between yourself and a bad decision, or between yourself and another 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Vex money. There's a chapter, there's a chapter in the book on vex money. So that's another thing that I would say. I would also say is to understand that you have enough. You do not need another qualification. You do not need all these other things that people would have you think that you need. You don't. You have to be prepared to get in the ring. And that's what I'm saying. That's what I say to a lot of people. If you get in the ring, you're gonna fail, or you're gonna win. And if
Yeah.
you
Back to the
fail,
back
it's
to
not
the
a
guts
right.
and gumption.
Yes,
Back to the guts and gumption, right?
it's not a fail. What it is, it's a lesson. And as long as you're prepared to get back in the ring all the time, you are going to eventually get there. But one of the other things that you also really have to have is resilience. You have to have resilience. You have to be willing to get back up each time that you fall. You have to break away and create what I call that fearless person, in yourself. And
Yeah.
that person who is prepared to be judged, that person who is prepared to look like a beginner, because regardless of how much experience you have, I'm a beginner. I am in a sphere that I've not been in before. So I know that I'm a beginner, regardless of how much skills I have and experience I have. I'm also still a beginner. And if you have that fear of judgment, you have that fear of failure, you have that fear of looking like a beginner, then you're probably not going to get very far. Which is also the reason why one of my major workshops is called Master Fear, Live Out Loud. We have to start to look at that fear that we as Caribbean people carry. People are
Yeah.
going to see you, and it's okay.
What we haven't spoken about is, what do you mean specifically by living out loud? Because we may all have different
Different, yes.
definitions
So
of that.
for me, it's about living that authentic life. Who are you? This is what you present to yourself as to wherever you are. It's also about being very intentional. And the only way that you're going to be able to reach that financial life that you want to is if you are intentional. You are adding your dollars exactly to where you want them to be, and not to where society thinks that you should be. You don't need a house with 6 bedrooms. If you think that's what you want, so be it. But you cannot be doing that because you think, okay, I'm a chartered accountant, I'm a lawyer, this is what society expects of me. You have to get to that point where you are saying, this is who I am as a person, this is my authentic life, this is me being intentional, this is what I want to do. And living out loud could be a life of leisure, it could be a life of travel, it could be a life where you're saying, I want to retire early. It could be a life where you're saying, like, you know what, I put in my 30 years, I'm good. It doesn't necessarily have to look like what anybody else version looks like.
Is
But what
doing, yeah.
it must be the life that you want, and it must be what you're willing to work towards. This is not about anyone. This is about you giving yourself permission to be who you want to be.
All right. And I just wanted to bring people's attention back to a couple of those pillars that you were talking about in this kind of living out loud. I would call it a framework, is that financial wellness, the health, and understanding the emotions that you have behind your spend. Those are three of the things that we talked about. So if people want to learn more about living loud, within your budget, the book, the brand that you're about to launch, I understand that the workshops, the speaking engagements, and whatever else is involved in that, how can they find you? Where do they go to find out more?
So the book is available on Amazon. It's also available in printed copy from the UWI bookshop in Barbados. It's available in printed copy in Bermuda bookstore in Bermuda. And you can also get it in a couple of libraries at UWI Library, Barbados Public Library in Tortola. And my websites are tanjagittens.com and livingloudonaBudget.com. And I'm always updating as to where you can find the book. and all activities about the brand, you will also find on Living Loud on a Budget. I also do have a YouTube channel. I have a TikTok channel, and everything is under the same brand, Living Loud on a Budget or Tanja Gittens.
All right. So guys, you heard that. I want you to check them out. Check out the website. I was there, of course, doing my research before the interview, but it's very clear what Tanja is up to. And of course, look out for the launch of all those things coming very soon. Tanja, I want to thank you so much for being my guest on the Island Woman podcast and for exploring and being very candid with me, not only about the business, but how you perceive your kind of impact yourself, your own economic impact, and how you perceive your own well-being, which is something that we're exploring throughout this season. Thank you so, so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me and also for giving me the opportunity.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Island Woman podcast with my guest, Tanja Gittens. Thank you so much for taking the time. If you like this, make sure to share it with a friend, leave a comment or both. And if you watched it on YouTube, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It's free. Great news. The Island Woman podcast is not only on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, but it is also now on Amazon Music. That's right. So tune in wherever you choose. This has been episode 1, season 3 of the Island Woman podcast. I'm your Island Woman, Diane Squires, aka Deanne. Until next time.